Then very deliberately she put away the set and closed the drawer. When she turned to me her face was quite blank. "I dare say I was merely sharing in the general hysteria," she said blandly. I am not certain precisely what I said, but I was certainly anxious about those two poor women next door. With that she admonished me as usual about locking the windows, and in her long heavy black swept out of the room and up the stairs. Mother must be well over 60, for I was the child of her middle age, but she still sits erect in a chair and moves with the dignity which is a part of her tradition. I felt rather helpless as I watched her go, for I was as certain then as I am now that she could have helped if she had wanted to. I still marvel at her silence, at the pride or whatever it might have been that kept her suspicions to herself, or to herself and Mrs. Talbot. But here again I am up against the Crescent itself, its loathing of publicity, its distrust of the police, and its firm belief that every man's house is his castle. That was of course on Saturday night, and I had no intention of doing anything but follow Mother up to bed. But I did not get to bed until hours later. Due to that false sense of security of Mother's, that the thing was over and done with, Holmes was no longer sleeping in the house, and as I went upstairs myself I stopped at the rear window which overlooks the garage and saw him in his room. Probably he had forgotten to draw the shade, or was indifferent, for he was still fully dressed. Mother had gone into her room. I stood by the window and gazed in surprise at what he was doing. What he was doing, so far as I could see, was cutting the pages out of a book. He would take a knife, bend over a table, cut carefully and then take out the page and drop it, either onto the floor or into a basket. I could not see which. And he was working carefully and deliberately, so far as I could tell, doing only one page at a time. It seemed to be slow work, or perhaps he was clumsy, for he managed to take out only 2 or 3 while I watched, and the whole performance was so mysterious that when at last Mother called me I could scarcely tear myself away. When finally I was free I was still curious. Holmes's window was dark by that time, but it occurred to me that in all this dreadful business perhaps I had considered Holmes far too little. Certainly he knew a great deal about us. If the Lancaster servants had known about the money, for instance, he could easily have known also. I remembered that time I had seen him with Peggy on the path. Then too he could easily have known of the axe in the woodshed, and the habits of the Lancaster house. True, he had had an alibi for the hour of the murder. Mary had said he was having a cup of tea in the kitchen at the time. But our kitchen clock is notoriously unreliable, that is, Mary has a habit of turning it ahead, so that the other servants will get down in good time to breakfast. Therefore Holmes, having his tea before taking Mother out, might actually have had it some 15 minutes or so before 4. And Holmes, like Brian Dalton, had an eye for a pretty girl. If the Lancasters' Peggy was involved, it seemed to me that she was far more likely to have been his tool in securing the gold than anyone else. The only stumbling block seemed to be that, having already secured the money, the murder in that case was utterly unreasonable. Unless of course he had needed more time in which to dispose of it, or unless Mrs. Lancaster herself had been suspicious. But apparently she had not been suspicious at all. It was Mr. Lancaster who, for some reason still unknown, had insisted on the audit on that previous Thursday. It was all too much for me, and so I determined to carry my new theory to Jim and the Dean person. I had to wait for Mother to settle down, of course, and she took a maddening time about it that night, making her usual Saturday preparation by putting her hair in kid rollers and laying out her church clothes for the morning. At last she slept, however, and once again for the third successive night I crept out of the house. I had expected to have to rouse the Wellington house when I got there, and even to defy any officer detailed to watch the place. But neither was necessary. There was a light in the library windows, and my tap on one brought Jim himself to it. "It's Lou, Jim," I said. "Can you let me in? Go to the kitchen porch. I'll open the door there." There was something conspiratorial in our movements, in the silence with which the door opened and I slid in. But there was nothing conspiratorial in the library, now miraculously restored to order, where Mr. Herbert Ranchester Dean was hastily putting on a coat and lamps were cheerfully burning. "Well," he said, "it's the young lady of the cellar. Are you like your fellow creatures who live in the basement, and only emerge at night?" "I was at the inquest today." "Were you indeed? And what did you think of our little performance?" "I'm more interesting in one I saw an hour ago," I told him, and took the chair he offered me. Suddenly his light manner left him and I saw him as he was, shrewd, keen and observant. But he finished lighting his pipe before he asked me about it. What was that? It's about our chauffeur, Holmes, Mr. Dean, I said. Why do you suppose he would be cutting the leaves out of a book tonight and then throwing them away? What is he trying to get rid of? He sat up suddenly and put down his pipe. He was doing that? I watched him in his room, about an hour ago. What sort of book? Could you tell?